Hello all of you out there, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 oldest Ark Tames, so let's get into it. So in at number 10 is the Theory, and this creature is just one of those creatures which, albeit was in the original game of Ark, at least I think it did come to the game originally, but I don't remember too much of, but it is still an extremely useful tame today, and back then I still did use it a little bit, but not as soon as it released back in June the 17th of 2015, or at least I think it released back then, or that is when it was announced, something along those lines. Either way, it was in the very early stages of the Ark game, but I didn't use it too much, but I did kind of use it more in 2016, back in those days of Ark, not in 2015, in those really early days of Ark, but in those later early days, 2016, 2017, I did use a lot out of this. So obviously this isn't going to take the number one spot, but it is still a creature which to this day, and still back in 2016 and 2017, like I've said, did have a lot of great use, and still has a lot of great use actually. I shouldn't put it in the past tense. It is still a great creature now, and in ASA it is still a great creature. This is great at gathering fiber, thatch, wood and berries, and it is great for the dragon boss fight on the island. You really just can't go wrong with the Theory at all. It just gets everything right, and it is just one of those tames which is great, and I think every Ark player at some point should tame one, especially because its saddle is unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
Next up we have the Seego, and this creature is again just one of those basic essential creatures which I think every Ark player should obtain at some point, and there is nothing which you can really say against the Seego. This is just one of those creatures which you have to tame again, and especially with the TLC 3 update, this is a much better creature now. But the reason why I'm putting it above the Theory, which some people probably wouldn't, and in terms of use of creature, the Theory is a better creature than the Seego, but in terms of pure nostalgia and back in the day and my memories of these creatures, I would put the Seego higher, as the Seego was kind of that first big tame which I obtained, which was a real big milestone for me, which I didn't get from any other Ark creature, apart from one other, which is very notable, which I'll talk about, and that is later on this list. But yes, nostalgia is playing a big factor in this list too, although not the biggest out there. There are still some creatures on this list which are great, and I still remember really fondly. And yeah, there's just loads of creatures on this list which are affected by nostalgia. But in terms of the Stego's TLC 3 update uses, which obviously it didn't have back in the day, it has its 3 plate modes now, the sharpened, hardened and heavy plate, which is great for berry gathering. There's one which is great for turret soaking, and the other which is great for not dealing damage to wood, for gathering wood. Definitely an essential resource which you'll need a lot of in your Ark journey. Some of you may say that this is sacrilegious, that I'm putting the carb enemies above the Theory and the Seego, but really back in the day I loved the carb enemies so much, and to this day I actually still really like the carb enemies as well. It is just one of those creatures which I find really appealing, and I just love this thing in so many ways. The carb enemies is just so good, but I should probably stop just spewing adjectives in your face and actually talk about why I liked the carb enemies back then and why I still like the carb enemies to this day. In terms of its uses, I actually found this was a really easy tame, and I enjoyed its berry gathering. At least I think it can gather berries. If it can't, that's going to be a little bit embarrassing, isn't it? As I remember gathering berries on this thing. If it can though, then yeah, it is actually a pretty reasonable berry gatherer in the early stages of the game. But namely, I did use it for gathering oil and silica pearls whenever they were added. I think they were in the original game. Were they there in the beginning? I actually don't know. Comment down below if they were in the beginning. But either way, I did use them for ocean exploration and gathering of oil and silica pearls, as obviously that was something that you needed, and the ocean was obviously not finished back then, so there wasn't all the dangers, but it was still a particularly scary place, and the carb enemies really made the oceans somewhat less hostile, and that is why this was just such a great creature for me back in the day, and definitely one which still to this day you should tame, or if you're not into it, you can still use it for keratin. In at number 7, we have the Spino. And this creature really is just one of those kind of Rex-like creatures, and just one of those big carnivores which were heavily respected back in the day, and the Spino is still pretty respected to this day as well. And this is just one of those creatures which I think every Ark player should tame at some point, and depending on the environment and the time, obviously, these actually can be a little bit more easy to tame than something like a Rex, although that isn't usually the case, but they aren't much harder. The only real advantage you have of taming a Rex over a Spino in terms of difficulty is the Rex is significantly slower than the Spino, but that also means once tamed you have a much slower creature than if you tame the Spino, where you'll get a much faster creature which will do a lot better in the long run. Unless you're doing bosses, obviously, then the Rex is going to be a better option. But for everything else, underwater exploration and all kinds of moving around the Ark map and combat as well, the Spino is pretty much going to be one of your best bets. And back in the day as well, the Spino was just a highly respected creature which everyone really knew as just like the Rex, but a little bit better, is essentially how it was regarded as it was seen as a bigger carnivore, a more powerful carnivore, and just a better carnivore overall. And I don't think it had the hydration buff back in the day, but now it does, and it can stand on its hind legs too, which obviously allows it to deal even more damage, and in water it can deal even more damage still. Now, the Anki is just one of those tames which some people may have said was extremely annoying back in the day, and actually it was kind of annoying in a sense. There was just always an aggroed Anki on you, but when you actually tamed one, you really did appreciate these things. Although back in the day, I didn't really tame much of an Anki. Again, coming more into 2016 is when I kind of started with the Anki. Before that, I just used a metal pick, and I just got along with that. Although I really should have started using the Anki sooner, as this is one of the best Ark creatures, and definitely the best Ark creature out there for gathering metal. It is definitely one of the most useful creatures which you will find in the Ark game, and back then and still to this day, it is one of the most useful Ark tames, and nothing really can beat it. Obviously there's the Dodic as well, which is great for stone gathering, which you can kind of put in this position as well. Although I only really tamed the Dodic back in the day, and I tamed it before the Anki actually, because it could roll, and that was seen as a really cool ability, and I really did like that, and that was just such a cool feature. Although the Anki didn't have it, I would still say the Anki is the more useful creature. In at number 5 is the Castoroides. And when this thing was added, as it wasn't in the original game when it first came out, this was just a creature which was so highly respected, and loads of people started going out for this thing. It was just so good, and the fact that its saddle acted as a smithy as well was just such a cool ability, albeit not new, as the RG did have that before the Castoroides. But the Castoroides was just one of those creatures which was seen as really cool, and it was a kind of upgraded carb enemies for me, as I could take it into the water, and it was a lot faster than the carb enemies, and it dealt a lot more damage than the carb enemies, which was useful to me. And again, with that saddle being a portable smithy, I could repair any gear if I needed to. And also they were great for gathering wood back in the day, and the fact that I didn't build in stone back then, I built in wood, and wood was such a drag to get because obviously I didn't change the settings at all. I just played exactly on official, which I think a lot of people did back then. It was an absolute savior to have this creature to get a load of that wood gathered, and you should definitely get one of these things still to this day if you don't have a chainsaw. If you have a chainsaw, just use the chainsaw, but if you don't, get a Casto. They're one of the best wood gatherers in the game. Next up, we have the Raptor, and the Raptor was just that creature which was that carnivore which was just so accessible to everyone, and you couldn't really not tame a Raptor. And I went through a lot of Raptors in my time actually, as they kept getting killed in loads on loads of different ways, which obviously is kind of how it went. But you seemed to care a lot more back then when a creature died, and it was actually a pretty sad loss back in the day when a creature of yours died, whereas now I don't really seem to care as much. I don't know what that means for me as a person anymore. I guess I may just be dead inside now, and I can't care or love for anything. But in terms of the Raptor, this is obviously one of the best carnivores in the game. Obviously, not like the best carnivore in terms of stats, but in terms of when you can get this thing and how much damage it will deal at a time, and the speed which it has, as long as it isn't encumbered because its weight is pretty rubbish. This is one of the best creatures which you can have, and it will significantly speed up your progress in the early game, and it is definitely one which you'll want to have at some point in your Ark gaming experience. And it is definitely one which needs to be tamed at some point, and luckily doesn't have that awful pounce ability anymore, as that was absolute torture. It was fun once tamed, but in the wild, these things became way too OP for their level, and I'm glad Wildcard nerfed it. In at number 3 is the Rex, and the Rex is obviously just that creature which is insane for so many things, and it is one of my favorite Old Ark creatures. Even though in ASA now I've kind of lost a lot of respect for it, considering how easy this thing's taming method is, which is a little bit of a shame to me, as I really liked the Rex and I liked the kind of difficulty around its taming method. Although not very difficult, it did take some work and it was a big achievement once you tamed one. Whereas now it doesn't really seem like that, and they're just some of the easiest tames in the game, especially with ASA with the new baby feature. You can just find a baby Rex if its parents been killed by Bronto, and then you don't even need to kill a Rex sometimes. And the Rex which I got in ASA, I just found a baby Rex lying around and I clicked a button and then I had a Rex, and so many other people would have had that same experience as well. And it's just so broken how easy the Rex is to tame in Ark, and it's a little bit of a shame really, but I still love the Rex, and obviously it is one of the not best boss creatures out there. This is obviously one of the most balanced carnivores, and that is why it is so good for bosses, as it has enough health and it has enough damage, and obviously the weight and stam don't really matter, but if you want a creature with more weight and stam, you can always go for something like an Aloe. In at number 2 is the Carno, and I really do have fond memories of this creature, and this is pretty much my favourite Ark tame. I just love the Carno for everything which it has. The Carno is just one of those tames which I always go out to tame, and yes, you could say the Aloe is a better creature, but I always have a better time and more fun time on a Carno, and I'll always go out and tame a Carno before any other creature really. Sometimes I'll tame a Carno before a Raptor, although that is a little bit rarer nowadays, as Raptors are so easy to tame and they're so abundant seemingly. Like, Raptors are just everywhere now, especially on the island in ASA, that you kind of just can't get away from them, and at some point you'll just end up taming one on sort of accident, although deliberate. But, you know, in terms of my Raptor tame on ASA, it was actually an accident in some way. Obviously, I wanted to tame it once I'd bowlered it, but a Raptor came up to attack me. I had bowlers, and then I trained it from there. But if that Raptor didn't come up to attack me, I wouldn't have tamed it, so I kind of classify that as an accident. But in terms of the Carno, once tamed, its tame method is very simple, by the way. Just a very simple knockout tame. This creature, especially with the TLC update, is one of the best fighting creatures in the game, in my opinion. It has that bleed ability, which is very important for any carnivore to have, and also it will attack reasonably quickly, and it does have the health to keep up with that as well, which is very essential for any carnivore to have. In at number 1 is the RG, and do any of you out there have nostalgia for the old RG model? As yes, the new one is so much better, but that old RG model really does invoke nostalgia, and who doesn't love a good RG? Back in the day, obviously, I didn't use any kind of trap to tame this thing. I just simply got out a crossbow with some trank arrows and just tranked out a level RG, and I think it was only like a level 5 or something really low like that. It was an extremely low level, but I was very happy with it. And with my friends back in the day when I played Ark with them, don't really play Ark with anyone now, and I don't really actually play that much Ark, as I'm just always making videos but not really just playing Ark in my free time. I tamed a lot of RGs back then, and I have really fond memories of the RG. And obviously the RG is a really great creature as well, being one of the best flyers in the game and a really great creature for transporting metal across any map. Obviously that allows flyers, arboration and Gen 1, the RG simply isn't going to work for you, but there are other alternatives on the map, like you can use the Rock Drake or you can use the Bloodstalker. Also, the RG can pick up a wealth of creatures as well, and especially considering it can pick up the Anki and Doedicurus, it is really convenient for getting loads of resources, especially because it has weight reduction too, which I didn't talk about earlier when I was talking about how good this thing is at transporting resources around the map. And also, if it does kill a dead body too, it will have an insane regen buff, and it's saddled like the Castoroides has a portable smithy in it. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I hope that you enjoyed this one. And with that, I want to know what is your top 10 favourite Old Ark creatures, and I'll see you all later.